A year in prison for burning the American flag. Donald Trump might have even lost some of his staunchest allies on this one. We're going to get into all of it in just one moment. Make sure, of course, to subscribe at undercurrents.tv for the full premium experience of this show. Subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Now, let's take a look at Donald Trump signing an executive order on Monday that has some complicated ramifications, not quite as clear-cut as it's being presented by people on the left or the right. So first, let's roll the clip.
Lastly, sir, this is an executive order on flag burning. It charges your attorney general.
Would you listen to this? This is very important. Flag burning. All over the country, they're burning flags. All over the world, they burn the American flag. And as you know, through a very sad court, I guess it was a 5-4 decision, they called it freedom of speech. But there's another reason, which is perhaps much more important. It's called death. Because what happens when you burn a flag is the area goes crazy. If you have hundreds of people, they go crazy. You could do other things. You can burn this piece of paper. You can, but when you burn the American flag, it incites riots. If you burn a flag, you get 1 year in jail, and you will see flag burning stopping immediately, just like when I signed the Statute and Monument Act, because the people in this country don't want to see our American flag burned and spit on.
So I think President Trump himself is contributing a little bit to the confusion on this. Jed Rubenfeld over at the Free Press, who does excellent legal analysis, constitutional analysis of some of what feels unprecedented and is being presented by the media as crazy. You can usually get a pretty clear-cut legal analysis of the constitutional question on some of these huge, bigger questions over from Jed Rubenfeld. And in this particular case, it's well worth pointing out the executive order itself doesn't quite do what Donald Trump says that it does. The executive order, as Rubenfeld writes, makes no reference to a 1-year penalty, as Trump referencing, you burn the flag, you get 1 year in jail. That is an actual quote from President Trump. And doesn't even, as Rubenfeld puts it, quote, purport to criminalize flag burning. So here's what it actually does. Quote, it orders the Department of Justice to prioritize enforcement of existing criminal and civil laws when people have engaged in acts of American flag desecration that violate applicable content-neutral laws while causing harm unrelated to expression consistent with the First Amendment. So if you burn a flag while committing, quote, violent crimes, hate crimes, illegal discrimination against American citizens, or crimes against property and the peace, then the DOJ can make sure that you're prosecuted for those other offenses, even if people who committed the same offenses without burning a flag are not. So that's from Rubenfeld. And that's a little bit different, of course. A little bit different from the way that it was presented by Trump. Wasn't incorrectly presented at all by Will Scharf, who spoke and was standing next to him during the signing of that executive order. But it also then, as Rubenfeld puts it, calls for visa revocation and deportation when illegal immigrants desecrate the flag, provided that some other statutory provision allows for deportation. So Rubenfeld says that is a part of the order that raises, quote, more difficult First Amendment questions because lawful immigrants had the same 1A rights as citizens do against criminal prosecution, but the constitutional rights of aliens in deportation proceedings remain unsettled. This is something that's been tested by the Trump administration as well. And this is, again, we're really talking about, as J.D. Vance puts it, here's his post, and this came just Tuesday morning. He said a few things. Antonin Scalia was a great Supreme Court justice and genuinely a kind and decent person. That's in reference to just many conservatives who, since Trump came out and said it's not protected by the First Amendment to burn the American flag, which again is different than what the executive order does, kind of different than what the executive order does. They've been posting Antonin Scalia's opinion on whether or not it's protected speech to burn the American flag, and have been sharing that with great approval of the way Scalia put it. Scalia is a giant of the conservative legal movement and said, quote, "If I were king, I would not allow people," this is a CNN interview in 2012, "to go around burning the American flag. However, we have a First Amendment which says that the right of free speech shall not be abridged, and it is addressed in particular to speech critical of the government." That was the main kind of speech that tyrants would seek to suppress. Think about that. I mean, that's the core of America's identity as a country that fought a revolution against Great Britain. It is a country that said, we are criticizing the government. And that is, for Scalia, an important part of our Constitution. It gets to, he was an originalist, it gets to what the framers were thinking when they wrote the First Amendment, and it's very important. Now, Vance goes on to say, the president's executive order is consistent with Texas v. Johnson. So that is the decision that Donald Trump was referencing when he said, I believe it was a 5-4 decision. Yes. So I'm reading now from the Constitution Center, which writes, in the Texas v. Johnson case, this was in 1989, the court voted 5-4 in favor of Gregory Lee Johnson, who had burned a flag in protest at the Republican National Convention in Dallas in violation of a state law. Johnson's actions, the majority said, were protected symbolic speech, political in nature, and could be expressed even at the affront of those who disagreed with him. Now, there was a dissent from Justice Stevens in that case, and also William Rehnquist was in the dissent on that case as well. And this is who J.D. Vance says in note 3 of his post on X, Texas v. Johnson was wrong and William Rehnquist was right. So what did Rehnquist say? That Vance is agreeing with in this case. Rehnquist says the significance of the flag and the deep emotional feelings it arouses in a large part of our citizenry cannot be fully expressed in 2 dimensions of a lawyer's brief or a judicial opinion. Vance says Rehnquist is correct. The flag, the significance of the flag and the deep emotional feelings it arouses in a large part of our citizenry cannot be fully expressed in the 2 dimensions of a lawyer's brief or of a judicial opinion. So think about it that way, just sort of steelmanning it. You can say whatever you want to say. You can say the American flag deserves to be burned. You can say the country is bad in XYZ ways without actually burning the physical flag itself. Preventing you from burning the flag doesn't prevent you from saying whatever you want necessarily. Is that the flag is in and of itself a physical embodiment of these values and of what people have fought and died for, and for the very country that has enumerated these rights that we enjoy. Now, many, especially conservatives, will quibble with that. I don't mean to say that our rights are not from God. I don't mean to even open up that can of worms or get into that conversation about where our rights actually come from. But the point is, we have a constitutional enumeration of that rights. That means you have different rights afforded to you in America than in other places. And that is the country that is embodied in the physical flag itself. I agree with Scalia, but Rubenfeld says this decision actually could be getting tested. He says the fundamental question posed by the new executive order is whether today's justices might actually overrule the Supreme Court's 1989 and 1990 decisions holding flag burning to be constitutionally protected speech. So in 1990, the Eichmann decision reaffirmed the Johnson decision. So what Rubenfeld says is today's conservative justices may agree with John Paul Stevens in the Eichmann dissent. They may point to a long tradition of flag desecration laws. In 1907, the Supreme Court upheld a Nebraska statute prohibiting flag desecration, noting that a majority of the states at the time had such statutes. By 1989, when the court decided Johnson, 48 states had enacted such laws, as had the federal government. And remember, the question of a state law is what then went to the Supreme Court. So this is what could end up being tested in court challenges. If they make their way up to the Supreme Court, Johnson actually could be on the table. And that's what Trump is alluding to. So Trump said, again, in that video, when you burn the American flag, it incites riots. He didn't say in particular cases that this executive order targets when you burn the American flag, it incites riots. And that is worthy of criminal punishment, up to a year in prison. That's not what Trump said. He just said it plainly. Basically suggesting that burning the American flag itself should be a crime. Not in the particular cases in this executive order, but period. And that's what is different actually than what's on the table right now with the executive order. It is going to be tested in court, and it could, obviously, as Rubenfeld said, end up setting precedent that's important to the question of whether or not this is ultimately a crime, and it could overrule existing decisions. That's not what's on the table right now. It is what's being tested in the courts, but it's not what's on the table right now. This executive order didn't, because Donald Trump signed his name on the piece of paper, make it punishable up to a year in jail, or give you a year in jail if you go outside the White House right now, burn a flag, or outside your house right now, burn a flag, get arrested. That's not what's happening yet. That is, though, what the conversation was, even with people like Jesse Kelly, big supporter of Donald Trump, who said, this is garbage. I would never in a million years harm the American flag, but a president telling me I can't has me as close as I'll ever be to lighting one on fire. Although, of course, he said I would never in a million years harm the American flag. That was echoed. I think I actually saw more reactions like Jesse's than I did see support for Donald Trump. I saw J.D. Vance. I saw somebody from the Heritage Foundation. But I think most people have this, especially most American conservatives coming off the last 10 years. But I think just have this instinct that criticizing the government, even if it involves burning the flag, and even if it is, to the point Scalia makes, immoral, that is our right, and it is moral that we uphold that right. It is deeply moral to allow your citizens to have that right. It is our core identity as Americans, and as much as we may detest the actions of people who do it, we have to protect their rights to do it. What's interesting about that is it's part of the free speech battle that's shifting in the Trump administration. Zed Jelani, who's of course been on the show, responded to J.D. Vance and said, "JD, why did you spend months bashing Europe over its free speech policies, only for your administration to become the most anti-free speech administration in America since Richard Nixon?" Josh Hammer, who's also been on the show, said he agrees with J.D. Vance on all counts. But what Zed is getting at there is that you had the cases of like Rumeysa Ozturk, who was literally fighting a battle, immigrant, fighting a battle whether or not she could stay in the country because she wrote an op-ed that was calling for, at Tufts University, divestment. So boycott and divestment from Israel in the university. That type of thing is very obviously not free speech absolutism. And on the right, these were very interesting conversations that happened over the last 10 years. The right had this posture of free speech absolutism that shifted when Donald Trump came back into office and said, well, actually, if you are here as an immigrant, you don't get free speech absolutism. And now he's saying free speech absolutism stops at the American flag. These are interesting questions. And, we've covered them a lot on the show because it's very interesting just to work through how this is changing. Because again, I'm telling you, somebody in the conservative movement, the posture of free speech absolutism, this is America, this is who we are, this is core to our identity, was at an apex over the last 10 years during the cancel culture era and all of that. And it's what we're seeing right now is the clarification of who's really in the free speech absolutism camp and who's not. I'm personally closer to free speech absolutist. It's probably not totally correct to say that I'm a free speech absolutist. We could maybe have a debate about that at some point. But I'm clearly with Scalia in this case, and I'm very much in that camp. But what we've seen is that start to really fall apart. That posture has changed. And it's interesting to see. There's no question about it. So it was more of a cultural signifier, I think, over the last 10 years, whether you support a political incorrectness. Well, it's politically incorrect in most places to burn the American flag. So it's just obviously, I'm not accusing anybody actually of operating in bad faith, although, of course, I think some of the people who have supported, getting rid of students because they wrote an op-ed, I mean, that kind of thing is, yeah, I think some people have been operating in bad faith on that question. But this is the free speech discussion has just been sort of dominated by black and white free speech or you hate free speech for the last 10 years. And now the conversation is becoming, I think maybe a little bit more nuanced. So we'll see where it goes and we'll see how everyone shakes out personally. But that's the truth about the executive order that Donald Trump signed this week. Don't go out and arrest people, do citizens arrest on somebody burning American flag in their driveway. It might not pan out for you this weekend, but maybe in a couple of years, that will be different. So thank you so much for tuning in to Undercurrents. Please subscribe for the full premium experience over at undercurrents.tv. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe on YouTube. We're also on social media. We're on Instagram. We are on X. So make sure to head on over there. Give us a follow as well. We'll be back with more Undercurrents soon. Thanks for tuning in.